Hi, so I recently posted a video here on my channel where I used animation nodes and combined that with Blender physics simulations. And you guys really enjoyed those videos and wanted me to make tutorials for them, but I think instead it's better if I just pick 3 files, the finished files, and we go through them together. The animation nodes parts, the physics parts, maybe material, lighting, I don't know. And that way we don't have to start from scratch and we can save some time. And you can always pause the video and take a screenshot of the node setup or whatever. If you enjoy this kind of walkthrough video, then please give the video a like. Don't worry, I will have step-by-step tutorials, of course, in the future, but this is going to be a little bit of a different format for what we usually do here. So let's jump right in. Okay, this is the first file here. So I have this golden sphere that's kind of falling down. These steps, stairs, whatever. The whole setup here is really very easy. So I started off with a single cube, which is this guy down here. Hold on. This one. And I just gave it a little chamfer on the corners here. And then I used animation nodes right here to create a 15 by 15 grid. So if we look at this from the top view, you can see this 15 by 15 grid. And then I created this sort of winding staircase type just by using a radial fall off here, an object controller fall off set to radial. And then I'm moving the different tiles with that fall off, so we can see that here, right? So I'm just pulling these up, and we have basically one circle going around, and I set that to 12. I'm also moving them around over time, and I'm doing that with this wiggle fall off node here, using the time info, and then having another offset matrix node here for the rotation on X and Y. And that's really all the node setup. And if I hit play, you can see that we have those tiles and they're wiggling. Okay, now this is playing really slow. That's all that's necessary on the animation node side. Now I should have mentioned that this cube that I'm replicating, where is it? Here, does have collisions enabled here in the physics properties. Okay, so each duplicate here, each one of those also has collision enabled. Now the sphere on top of that has nothing to do basically with animation nodes. It's just an icosphere with a certain resolution that you can see here. Nothing too fancy. And that icosphere is a soft body. So if you want collisions, so the collision feature here, let me see. The collision thing that you can enable here is for particles, for soft body, and for cloth. For the rigid body world, basically every rigid body in your rigid body world already has collision enabled. You don't have to enable it extra. But if you want a soft body to collide with something, then that something has to have collision enabled. So really very, very easy. Now here the sphere, like I said, is a soft body. The soft body physics here is really nothing special, except that I enabled the plasticity here, and you can see it says permanent deform. So I think it looks really cool when the sphere rolls down these tiles, bricks, whatever, and it crashes into the tiles or that glass box that I put around. It deforms the sphere and it sort of keeps that deformation. So at the end, it all has like bumps and dents in it, and that's what that plasticity does. Of course, we have the goal switched off here. This is like the one thing that you always have to switch off when you do soft body physics, because otherwise objects don't really move. Anyways, so these are the settings, very simple. Then I baked everything to the cache here. Now, of course, every tile is a collision object. We also have gravity, which is the only thing that really makes this sphere move. and also the movement of the tiles sort of pushes the sphere around a little. On the outside here, I just put this box and gave it a glass material. The materials, by the way, so this golden sphere here, let me just switch over to the shader editor. This golden sphere, forget this, it's not used, uses my gold material setup, and the tiles here actually use my silver material setup. It's just a quick and dirty way to get some nice looking results. I'm using cycles here to render this, and you can see that on top of the silver material for the tiles here, I also added a noise texture for the patina map here on the material node, which are those like darker spots here, just to give it a little bit of a random feel. And well, that's really all there is to it. Of course, this glass box on the outside here, this guy has a glass material assigned to it, and I played around with this material a little bit because I'm lighting this scene with an HDRI. So over here I have this Workshop 2K HDR from hdrihaven.com, and I have not set the film to transparent. As you can see here, it's not set to transparent. I want it to be black in the background. I don't want the world to be visible. That's why I switched off the camera here, the ray visibility. So we get nothing on the outside. And then also I used this glass material for that glass box because I just want this glass box to be a little bit visible. So if we would just have a glass material in here, you can see we get a lot of reflections and we can hardly look through it. And I want it to be way more transparent. So I'm using the is glossy or is transmission. So this add node basically is an or, right? If it's glossy ray or transmission ray, I want this to be transparent. Otherwise, I want it to look like glass. So we do get the refraction here. We do get some reflections, but we get mostly transparent if we look straight through this glass. And this gives a very nice effect, I think. And we can still tell that there's something there, because if it wasn't there, this would look weird when I need this thing to keep the ball in while it's falling down. Otherwise it would just fall off my little staircase here. So that's the materials, the node setup. Other than that, it's just physics. So this ball just bounces down, and it's like I said, I baked it all to cache, and well, here's the final result. So here is the second scene that we can look at. This is all rigid body simulation. So I created an object called cube, and then I scaled it up on the C to make sort of a pin. Again, down here I'm using distribute matrices to create a grid. In this case I'm creating a 20 by 20 grid, and I'm using these integer inputs so that I can later change like how many pins do I want in X and Y. Now each pin, so this cube object here, has the rigid body enabled. It is a passive rigid body, but it's animated. Okay. And then since I'm instancing this single cube pin with the object instancer, and I have copy full object and deep copy enabled, each and every one of those pins here also has the rigid body enabled, and they're all passive animated objects. So now I have a grid of 20 by 20, 400 pins, and I can manipulate those. And what I'm doing is essentially I'm moving them on the Z-axis. And I'm using the music, piece of music, MP3 file to do that. And that's really what this down here is. So how do you get music into a Blender? You just go to the video editor. If you don't have this tab up here, then you just go to this little plus here, and then you can get the video editor. And then you just drag and drop your MP3 file in here. So down here we have the music, and over here in Animation Notes, we can then tell Animation Notes, take sound from sequence. And here you have basically all the MP3 files you might have in your blend file. So I just have this one MP3 file, and I'm plugging that and my 400 pins into a subprogram here, which also takes X and Y parameters, which is this 20 by 20 grid, so I can easily change that. Now this loop, the inside of this loop here, looks a bit complicated, but it's really not that hard to understand what's happening here. So we have the sound, and we're plugging that sound into our loop and using this loop, and we can use the sound spectrum node in Animation Notes to get like the sound spectrum. So you can tell this sound spectrum node how many like divisions of your entire sound spectrum do you want, and I set this to full. You can see here you can define different settings. I set it to full, and I'm just taking basically the lower part of that whole spectrum where actually the music is happening mostly, and I'm slicing of that entire list. I'm just slicing out that part. And then I also did something here. So let's just go to a frame here. You can see the music is manipulating the pins and moving them on the Z-axis. And let's look at this here. Okay, so I also did something here. So the sound spectrum would look like this, right? So we have most information here in the low to mid frequency sections, and then nothing at the high end. So what I did was I actually take this slice from our sound spectrum, and then I flip it over to the other side. So when we look at this from the front here, you can see this here is like low frequency, and then this is the mid frequency information here, and then there's nothing over here on the high frequency. So I'm just cutting that away and flipping or mirroring that sound spectrum over to the other side of the X, and then we get this. So we get like two little mountains. And then what I also did here is you can see that I'm plugging the time info here into the sound spectrum, but I'm also moving the time info back in history. So this first row here, first row of pins, this is the sound spectrum of the current frame. And then on the second row of pins, I get the sound spectrum from the previous frame. The third row has one frame past that. So we basically get a sound spectrum history here going just by manipulating the frame input here. And we have the sound spectrum node inside of our loop. Okay, so when I hit play, you can see the front here is where the music is happening, and then the history of the sound spectrum is being pushed back on the y-axis here. So this is why we're getting this. Okay, so the music is playing, it's manipulating the front here, and then one frame in the past is the second row, 2 frames in the past is the third row, and that's why it looks like this is like shifting backwards. Okay, and then that's all that's to it, there is to it in this Animation Notes setup here. Let's see, do we have everything? Yes, we're slicing the list of pins here to get like one row, to manipulate that, and then manipulate the next row with one frame after that, and so on. And we are just changing the C value here of each pin. This is the reverse list, that's that flipping that I was talking about, to combine a new list and then change the C, and then offset our pins on that C position basically. And that's really all there is to it. The blend file of all of the animations are still available over at my Patreon page for just $2 a month. You can download all of the blend files of almost all of my tutorials. So that's that node setup. Use the music and move the pins. Each pin is a rigid body because my original pin was a rigid body, and I'm instancing the pin here again with copy full object and deep copy. So each pin is a rigid body, passive animated. And then on top of that, all I did was I threw on some objects here, an icosphere and a cube, and made those into active rigid body objects. And then Blender does its magic and simulates this rigid body world, and this is what you get. Oh, and of course I also put a cube around. In this case I made it completely invisible so that these objects, while the music is playing and they're being thrown around and bouncing around, so that they don't fall off and fly away, they're always staying here on my moving grid of pins. Okay, so materials in this case are really not very interesting. Maybe one thing that we couldn't look at here is the camera, because it's just rotating around the center basically. And really easy way to do that is just to create an empty in the middle, then parent the camera to that empty, and then when we rotate this empty, the camera rotates with it. So if we look through the camera here, you can see if I rotate this on the Z-axis, and then all you have to do is keyframe the empty, which you can see down here is 2 keyframes. So for this 1000 frame animation, I have a keyframe at the beginning where the rotation is 0, and then here I have a keyframe where the rotation is 1080 degrees. So we're flying around the entire animation. This is rendered in Eevee and it's rendered on transparent background. I do have an alpha over here to place my finished rendered image onto a dark blue background, but that's really all there is to it. So I explained this in my little overview video that I posted, I think a week or 2 ago. Basically, all we're doing is we're creating and moving objects, and then on top of that we have Blender's physics simulation. This is the third and final file that we're going to look at today. This also got a lot of attention by you guys. It's very similar to the other stuff. I created a single object that looks like this, and then I'm using animation nodes down here. It's called cylinder because the base shape was a cylinder, and then I stretched it. And I'm distributing these objects that I'm creating here, instancing here, along a line, a linear distribute matrix, and that's why we get this line here. And this is just the lower part. Basically this stuff down here is really very independent of the other stuff up here. So let's look at this first. So we have this linear distribution here, which gives us these objects. And then again, we have a sound from sequence, sound spectrum. I'm doing my reverse list mirroring part thing here again to combine those two into a new list. Then I'm moving them on the Z-axis and distributing or offsetting each object according to that vector. So we get this sound spectrum node and these bouncing things. That's really the entire node tree here. Nothing special again. The entire thing that we have down here is basically copied up here, and that's just for that outer part here. Like, I looked at this and I thought it looks kind of boring, so I created this second stuff, this stuff in the background here that you can see here. That's like rotating around, and I gave it a different color here, and that's just this part up here with the same thing, except that I also have this distribute matrices on a circle with a radius of 4, which is this. And then it's like a really messy thing just circling around here. Now, these are also collision objects in this case. So everything that you see here is a collision object. And then on top, I have a Suzanne monkey head. And what that is a cloth simulation. And this is all, has nothing to do with animation nodes. This is just Blender cloth simulation and with some pressure in it. That's why like the monkey head like inflated a little bit. And that pressure, that inside pressure of the cloth is really all there is to this animation. We have gravity, we have those things bouncing up and down with the music, and then we have the cloth simulation, and it's influenced by that bouncing stuff, and it has the pressure inside. That's why it just doesn't completely collapse. And then really you just let Blender animate, and it animates the cloth simulation, and it's bouncing up and down on the music. And then at some point Suzanne just falls off the back here, and there she goes. So that's really all there is to it. Materials here might be interesting, so let's check this out. I've done this several times before. Where is it? All I'm doing here, when we look at this material here, let's find an interesting frame. So I just take the geometry node of the object, take out the C information, and then offset that a little bit, plug it into this color ramp that goes from green to red. And then this is my color that I use in the principled shader. This is just metallic so that it's all very shiny and reflective and looks cool. And then the same thing with this material, just a different color ramp. And then we have a monkey head. This is very simple metallic material. And all I did for this wireframe thing, look here, that's just a wireframe modifier on top of Suzanne with the replace original checkbox here switched off. So we have the monkey mesh and the wireframe on top of it. It's really all there is to it. Very, very simple. Other than that, I just have this plane in the background here. I have this light that gives me this sort of halo look here. Then I have a backlight shining onto my scene here from the back to get nice rim light and reflections and stuff. And yeah, well, that's really all there is to it. I think the camera in this case is completely static. And then we get this animation, and then all you have to do is render it out. In the next video, I want to show you how we can use animation nodes as a very powerful alternative to particles to create something like this. So I'm going to show you how you can do this using a particle system, and then I'm going to show you how we could use animation nodes to have more flexibility and actually a way more control than with a particle system. And if you're interested in that, make sure you're subscribed, hit the notification bell so you know when the video comes out. If you create anything cool, don't forget to tag me. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you for watching. Chris P. out.